there was an article that said a study, right? And again, everybody's depends on whether you believe some of these studies out there, but they did a DNA analysis of a troop of chimps out there in Africa, and they found, and several people did it, separately, several groups, and they ended up convinced that this troop had more genetic diversity than all the human race, and they could not explain it. They said, with 8 billion people, you would think that, we create new genetics every day. There's mutations going on every day. And the question is why, And so one fellow asked me about that, and he says the following. He says, so what is the explanation for chimps' higher diversity if they also inbreed? Because I'm saying, inbreeding reduces genetic diversity over the thousands of years, right? So for any species that's been around for quite a while, you lose genetic diversity, not gain it. And even though you accumulate mutations periodically, daily, minutely, whatever, it doesn't, for some reason, we lose it, right? And so here are my takes on that, okay? You got to look at where a species is in its history. If you can grab a species, for example, if you knew that this species is going to die in the next 100,000 years, maybe they've been around for only 100,000 years, and you're looking at the midpoint. And so they haven't had time to lose their genetic diversity because they still have 100,000 more years to go for whatever reason, right? And so the question is, are we at the beginning of our species' lifespan, or are we close to the end? And you know my answer to that. We're close to the end, very close. It's how fast also a species conquer diseases. Chimps are in a given region of the planet, and they don't migrate today, and they haven't migrated. They're always there. And so they're localized. The question is whether all these chimps have had a chance to meet different kinds of diseases that would sifted out those chimps that did not have natural defenses and create, a more uniform group of chimps. And again, that's got to do also with time. Okay, so there's two things going on in there. And then again, migration. When species migrate, they encounter new obstacles, new predators or prey, new diseases, and it takes a long time to adapt to them. Okay, and so again, if the chimps were more or less always in the same region, they haven't had a chance to be challenged from a genetic point of view. Those are my general takes on that. Here's a graph that shows this. I put that in my Neanderthal book, okay? And it's more or less like this. Mutation rate increases as the group adapts to new diseases, climates, foods, predators, etc. So you have, a group that branches off from the mother trunk and has to adapt to a certain region. It becomes isolated from the mother trunk. And throughout this initial period, they gain genetic diversity. But then over time, they lose it because despite the fact that, they have founder's effects and bottlenecks, that whittles out some of the diversity from the whole population. And it's not a smooth curve as you see there. It's really ups and downs because of, these factors. And here's what it looks like for humans. This is our curve compared also with a population curve there. You can see that for most of our lifespan, we were a very small population. And, and the genetic diversity dropped gradually, throughout this time. And it was only because we were primarily hunter-gatherers. We were moving around. We were encountering new diseases, new predators. We had to adapt. And these are, this takes thousands of years. When we got to agriculture, we more or less settled down, even though we were still colonizing the land. Okay? And it was only in the last maybe 500 years, you could say, that we really started colonizing the planet. The Portuguese, the Spaniards, the British, they went out there and colonized certain lands that they found. And they took diseases with them as well, But the issue is that's only happened, the era of colonization was maybe 500, 600 years ago. That's when they started building the ships that could go around the world. And 300 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution, where we went from agriculture to manufacturing, the first few countries that started that process. And that process ended in 1980, thereabouts, when a few countries started moving into the service region. They started becoming more service-oriented and less manufacturing. And today, we're all service economies on the planet. And what's become much less part of our, not only our labor, but also of our economic GDP is, we're a service economy. We're all services. And within services, I would say in the last 20 years, it's gotten even worse because we used to do manual services, like gardening and landscaping, barbering, stuff like that. Pizza delivery, kind of use your hands. It's a service where you're still active physically, right? And that's gone. Right now, the only services we're creating are internet services. And what's internet services? It's entertainment and ads. That you can summarize it with those two words. And a society cannot live on entertainment and ads. That's my take on that. Okay, too long to explain it to those who don't have the intuition to grasp that. You cannot run a world on entertainment and ads. So in fact, I call it non-work, and I give this scenario where you're next to God up there in the sky, right? And you're looking at the planet, and what do you see? Well, you see the things that we made, the physical things. So you see the houses, you see the cars, you see the streets, the food we grow, the cotton fields and cornfields and so on. That we can see. That you can see from up there. What you can't see are the services. The promises, the contracts, the money in the banks. Especially the numbers. That we don't see. And so, if you're going to judge whether a country is growing economically, you have to look at the real things and not the abstract things such as money. You can create all the money you want out of the machine, or just put a number in another zero, in the bank account. That doesn't change reality. You still haven't built a house. You still don't have a car. You still don't have a street. You don't have, the cornfields and the wheat fields. So if you're going to judge growth, real growth, it's got to be real things. And right now, we're not growing. Nowhere on the planet, or we're growing very slowly. Growth is really being, it's at a snail's pace, right? The other thing you got to keep in mind is regarding genetic diversity is that, we don't have new species. Here's a graph that shows, that after the dinosaurs went away, the mammals diversified. Why? Because the mammals go out there and they squat a niche. Okay? They just say, oh, I'm going to eat this food. And the other guy says, I'm going to eat this animal or whatever. And so what's happening is that you have all these animals fighting for their own interests, self-interests, these species that develop, and they evolve. And it comes a time when all the niches are taken over, because immediately every animal somewhere on the planet makes use of the resources available to it. And so they evolve, some bigger than the others, some faster than the others, depending on, the conditions, climatic conditions and environmental conditions, whatever. And so once they squat these niches, each one takes whatever is useful for them, the new animals cannot arise. Or in this case, mammals, right? Same thing happened to the dinosaurs, mammal-like reptiles, and so on, synapsids. But the point here is that, once they radiate, especially at the beginning, from that, you don't have new animals. What you have is these animals just evolving into other species as they travel the planet and encounter new environments, new diseases, etc., and new animals develop. But you don't have new animals. And here's another view of that one, of that graph that I just showed. Okay, this is a different way of seeing it here. Okay, and what happens is you have different types of animals develop. Okay, on the planet, what happens? You cannot have new animals. And, the researchers who do experiments in the labs, biology and so on, they really don't take this into consideration at all. Like if you're going to run an experiment, you're going to try to reach some kind of decision or figure out something in the lab. And let's say you run, I don't know, fruit flies. When did the fruit fly start? When did it start its journey? Did it start 1,000,000 years ago? 100,000 years ago? Maybe only 1,000 years ago? Does it make any difference? Well, I think it does. It'd be nice to know, when the fruit fly started its journey, okay? And if you don't know that, if you don't have that information, you may reach the wrong conclusions in the lab because you don't have the full history of this species that you're studying. And part of that issue has to do with these mice. The same fellow asked the question here. He says, why haven't big city mice gotten extinct since Calhoun's experiments? Calhoun ran experiments with mice where he put them in a small enclosure and he allowed them to multiply. And we had 4 couples. That was the founder's effect, of the starting point, and they ended up with 2,200 mice in that same enclosure. And towards the end, they became homosexual, autistic, and eventually the colony disappeared. And he did this experiment, I think, like 30 times, or at least for 30 years, since 1948 to the 1970s, I think 75. And throughout the time, he always got the same result. Okay? So he says, is it due to the migration of rural mice? And no, the issue is the city is a bigger place than Calhoun's claustrophobic enclosure. That's one issue. That's what he was testing, what the effect was on the mental condition of these animals. And the city mice, they hunt, they nest, mate, they go around. And these animals, the ones that he had, Calhoun had, they were always in the same place, in the same conditions. And there's something there that you got to keep in mind, that, there's a level of, you could say, boredom. That's one issue. And the other one is that they didn't have to struggle. They don't have to do anything. The food was there. The water was there. They had enough food and drink. So they didn't have to go out and hunt, and they didn't have that incentive, you could say, that urge to go out there and do things. And so this makes you stop and think that maybe we're in the same boat, because Calhoun reached the conclusion that humans were no different than mice in that sense. And in a way, you have to agree with them. I mean, today, we all have the silver spoon, more or less. We don't have to struggle for anything. You want food, you take some, what is it called, money? You take it to the supermarket and you buy whatever you want, and someone brought it by magic. It came to the shelves, and you take it off the shelves and buy it and bring it home and eat it. And if that's not good enough for you, well, you go to McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken and just, have your fill. And so the question here is, we have it so easy in that sense. We don't have to struggle. And here we are at home, maybe watching TV, playing games, whatever, doing whatever you do, entertaining yourself, because that's the world of today, a lot of entertainment. And what's the issue there? The issue is that you don't have to struggle. You're not fighting the environment, the condition. You don't have to worry about lions attacking you, none of that. And this is more or less the situation that the mice had. So I think you got to factor that into why Calhoun's mice, eventually ended up being extinct and lost their minds. In fact, he concluded, he says, they stopped being mice. And the question is whether we stop being humans, okay? And the other thing you got to consider is the fact that when he started his experiment also, he took mice that were in the labs. He didn't go out into the forest hunting for mice, or, at the railroad tracks or whatever. He got them from someone who already had mice. Say, hey, give me 4 couples. And so we don't know what the origin of those mice were. I mean, did he do a DNA analysis, a chromosome analysis of these mice? Of course not. And so he doesn't know what his starting point is. And again, this has to do a lot with what I said a minute ago, that, you got to look at the full history of the animal that you're going to do research on. When did mice start? And the way I look at this is that, like in the case of humans, we've been around maybe, 200, 300,000 years. Big window there from 200, 300,000. What do I mean by that? I mean that if any of you today, female or male, doesn't matter, or in between, today we got to mention those as well. You go back in time, 200, 300,000 years ago, and you have sex with someone in those days, you probably would still have a viable children, Something good comes out that can continue reproducing. But the farther back you go in time, beyond 300,000 years, 400, 500,000 years, well, at some point, you're going to reach a human that gave us origin, or that was in our lineage, with which you cannot have viable kids. And you can say at that point, that's a different species. The species starts at reproduction. And then that's my definition of species, reproduction. Okay? And so the question is, what is the case of the mice? When can you take one of these lab mice, take them back in time and say, this mouse can still reproduce with this other mouse over there, and beyond that, he cannot. Okay? So this is the kind of question that a lot of these researchers don't ponder or don't include in their studies, and this is something you got to think about. Okay, here we have a nice situation. We have chimps use military tactic only ever seen in humans before. And it turns out that these chimps, one troop looks at the other troop, they're enemies, they're different countries, different lands, sort of like, the United States and China, something like that. Chimps are from different sides of the Atlantic or Pacific, right? And it says researchers observed 2 Western chimpanzee communities in Africa take to the hills to carry out surveillance of each other, much like reconnaissance missions used by militaries. Okay, they then use the intel to decide when to enter contested territory. Okay, and so they look at each other and they say, they do a little study, kind of spying on each other. To see if they can have some advantage in their wars. Okay, so chimps, I guess we carry it in our bloods. We're kind of chimps, aren't we? All of us. And here we have 2 chimps. One is the U.S., the other one is the Chinese. And one of the chimps, the U.S. is quietly arming Taiwan against a Chinese invasion, but it could backfire. And it's saying the Biden administration is treading a precarious balance between not aggravating China's nationalist President Xi and providing Taiwan with the weapons it needs to potentially fend off China's vast military, analysts told Insider. And there you see the map made by the Chinese military, how they would attack Taiwan, little island there. They would attack it from the mainland, let alone, with their own airplanes and ships and whatever. And so, you could say that maybe China is getting ready for a war, which is supposed to happen maybe in 3 or 4 years or thereabouts. And they want their province back to be part of the mainland China. And I think that's one of the reasons she came to San Francisco the other day, and had a talk with Biden. I guess their main point is, we want our island back. We want you guys out of here. And part of the problem is that, you have Taiwan Semiconductor over there, which is the #1 distributor of chips, not potato chips, but integrated circuits, right, in the world. And it's not so much that that's part of it. Part of the equation is that they're the #1 distributor, but the other part is that they have a lot of technology in their fabrication areas. And imagine if that would fall into the hands of China. Suddenly, they advance like 8 or 10 years in their technology because now they have it right there. It belongs to them. So they don't have to go and steal it through spies or whatever. They have it there. And so there's a double whammy there. They're a little worried about China grabbing Taiwan primarily because of that. There are other things that Taiwan has. And, the United States has reached an agreement with China. They have this one China policy. China's the communist China is the real China, and the other one's not a China. It's not part of the world. It's not a country. That's officially what's out there. But then they have this fine print where it says, hey, you can take over Taiwan, but in a peaceful manner, meaning that Taiwan has to agree. Imagine if California had to agree to be part of the Union, I don't think the United States would like it, and that's more or less the situation there. And so the question is whether there's going to be a war in 4 or 5 years, on top of the wars we already have. We have one in Ukraine, another one over there in Israel, Palestine, whatever side you take there. And it's going to be quite interesting what's going to happen in the next few years, okay? Because China is improving its military capabilities. On the one hand, it's also going out there and influencing other countries economically first, and maybe later on with military. And so, China's growing. The United States is stalling more or less. Its economy is not growing as fast as it used to. China's growing at a faster rate right now because it was so far behind. And the question is, at some point, there's going to be a rivalry there. Not to mention that we have another empire over there called the Russian Empire. You have these three empires that run the world. And, so the question is what's going to happen with all that? You got to stop and think. I don't think it's going to be resolved peacefully, primarily because Mother Nature she's not a peaceful woman. She wants war. She works through conflict, not through agreements. The lion doesn't reach an agreement with rivals such as the hyenas or even with its prey. The lion knows what it's got to do. In fact, lions fight lions. There's no agreement between lions. You don't reach agreement. You fight. You have to kill, have to murder, get rid of the other side. And so think about that. There's got to be no peaceful solution when you have two empires clashing. In fact, Alexander destroyed the Persian Empire originally, and then the Roman Empire destroyed the Greeks, and so on. And it went on and on and on. It was never peaceful. Okay? So I doubt very much there's going to be peace when the interests of many people are at stake. Okay, and talking about that, here we have good old Putin, and he says that the West is increasing risk of weapons of mass destruction being used. So we have that added to all the rest. We've got these guys who are, playing around with fire, and I mean real fire, and it says that, essentially that the war in Ukraine, they're all talking about pressing the red buttons. And so the question is whether it's going to get to that point where at some point nobody cares, or someone doesn't care on one side, one of the empires doesn't care, and it says, hey, I'm just going to press the button. I'm not going to lose my job, because the other side won. Before I go, I'm going to press the red buttons. And so you got to think about that. When you're up there and, especially in the case of Putin, he's being hunted. He can't travel the world because the courts are going to get him. A guy like that, when you push him against the corner, and he's the boss of the empire, he's the emperor, right? I don't know how far you can push him. So I can't imagine how Ukraine can win the war, because when it's about to win, they're going to press the red buttons. And again, Mother Nature doesn't work through peace. She works through war. Okay? She's a nasty old witch. You can change that first letter if you want. And here you see also what's happening to the U.S. economy, why Putin is saying, the United States is in trouble. These are polls that they had out there. And they're saying, the United States is running into some kind of trouble. You have recession fears, inflation fears, and then job market booming. Well, a lot of people think that there are problems with the job market. And then also the U.S. economy leads the world. But, compared with other developed nations, the United States is not doing so great, And so at least this is the sense that people have, the people who participate in the polls. But it gives you an idea, in a way, if people are suffering, if people are feeling the impact of what's going on in the global economy. Because if everybody is, in great shape, the numbers would be in reverse. You would see more people saying, no, everything's peachy. And I don't care what's going on out there. I'm doing fine, So people would, in general, vote in favor and say, no, we're doing fine. But when people say we're not doing fine, it's because they're feeling the impact of what's happening out there, okay? And so you got to look at the polls, because it's a way of getting a feel for whether what's happening in the economy is affecting them, okay? And, the United States is now stalling a little bit. Its economy is stalling, and it's growing at a very slow rate. And here's part of the reason, okay? Here's the world population, okay? You can see how it's grown over time. I think this starts at the beginning of the Christian era. Let's see, I think so. Yeah, thereabouts. Okay, so it starts at the Christian era, and you can see how we progressed over time. And what you're seeing there is not only population, which is what that graph shows, but population implies, construction. What have you constructed in throughout this time? Okay, and again, if you're out there in outer space and you look at this, you would see, and you were there also eternally for the last 2,000 years. You would see how the world expanded as far as its economics. In other words, what we constructed, real stuff. And you say, okay, we were here very little. We had these teepees and tents, and from there we built houses, and now we build these big skyscrapers. You would see, the world growing. And the question is, is there any more room for growth? There's room as far as space is concerned, how much room we have. That we have. But what we don't have is the stimulus to keep growing. The stimulus first involves more population, which is not happening worldwide. And the second one is that we should be constructing, doing more manufacturing and work that builds infrastructure. And that's not the big part of the economy anymore. Okay? What you see growing now is, again, a lot of abstraction, internet services, and you cannot have those growing and say, oh, we created jobs. Yeah, you created jobs, but they're fake jobs. I say that services is not a job. Services means you're unemployed if you're doing services. Okay, that's the way I look at it, because you're not creating anything. And, in the end, it trickles down. It does trigger or stimulate manufacturing and agriculture, but not to the degree it used to. See, when population was growing exponentially, there was exponential growth of both agriculture, you needed more food for more people, and manufacturing. But when services overtook manufacturing, now you're creating jobs in an abstraction that is not real growth. It's fake growth. And so when they say, oh, I'm working in services, well, you're unemployed. You're a bum. Okay, one fellow says, changing the subject a little bit here, you should look into the Jews as Neanderthals theory. Actually quite convincing. Well, I did a video on Jewish Neanderthals. You can look it up. Okay. And one of the fellows who vouched for that theory was this fellow. His name is Stan Gooch, and he develops his hybrid origin theory. Cro-Magnon man evolves in northern India, Neanderthal man evolved in Europe and the Middle East. 35,000 years ago, Cro-Magnon abandons India and heads west through the Middle East into Europe, overrunning Neanderthals. By 25,000 years ago, the predominant type in Europe is Cro-Magnon. In the Middle East, a hybrid population emerges. That's, in general, his theory, a summary of his theory of this fellow. And so while they were in the Middle East, he's talking about a hybrid population emerges. Okay, well, I have a different take on this whole thing, and I did cover it in my Neanderthal video. And here it is. I think one picture is worth 1,000 words. Here it is. Neanderthal was an Arctic species. He was a hairy monkey, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, he didn't look anything like us, or in other words, he was a 2-footer, okay, instead of a 4-footer. But I'm saying in general terms, I think he was quite different. You can tell the difference between a Neanderthal skeleton and a human skeleton. And I'm not an expert. All I can tell you, I look and I can see the differences, okay? And I think anyone who looks at a human skeleton and a Neanderthal skeleton can tell the difference. Now, Neanderthal grew in Europe, like this fellow says, and I have a hard time believing that he would go to sunny Israel or Iraq or Syria, right? To hunt what? To hunt camels? I mean, he was hunting mammoths and woolly rhinos and other animals that were popular in the north. I don't think the Neanderthal ever migrated beyond Europe. Okay, so the Neanderthals that they say are Jewish Neanderthals, in regions that today form part of Israel, I don't think they were Neanderthals. Okay, and you say, well, what do you know? Well, I don't know anything. Don't worry about me. I'm just saying that there's a couple of papers at least that I have out there of people from Israel who studied them, studied these Neanderthal, alleged quotations on that, Neanderthal bones from the caves in Israel and Iraq. And they came to the conclusion that they're not your classical Neanderthals, meaning the bones there, the skeletons, the especially the heads, don't match quite readily the Neanderthals that you find in Spain and France and Germany. They're different. They're noticeably different. They measured many aspects of their bones and so on. They say these are not Neanderthals. And so it's not me saying that. It's people out there in Israel who studied these bones. All I can say is look up papers that talk about the so-called Jewish Neanderthals, in other words, so-called Neanderthals that were found in caves in Israel and Iraq primarily, and you'll find that they haven't reached an agreement. But I think all of them agree that there are differences. The experts who look at these bones, they see differences between the bones in Europe and in Israel, right? Now, are they a different species? Well, that's for you to reach your own conclusion. I say they're not. Okay, so no, there was no inbreeding or interbreeding between Neanderthals and humans. As far as I'm concerned, they were two different species. If a Neanderthal found a human, he would have killed him and eaten him, and vice versa. Okay, I don't think they would have shook hands and drank beer together and swapped wives. I don't think that happened. Okay, and here's something to top that one on. It's a new theory how Neanderthals DNA spread in Asia. And researchers have discovered that Neanderthal interbred with the ancestors of Asians at 2 points in history, giving this population an extra infusion of Neanderthal DNA, European DNA. What's the issue here? The issue is that we had this fellow, his name is Svante Pääbo, and he's part of the Max Planck Institute. He did a study from, I think, 2007 to 2010, where he issued his report together with his group. And they came to the conclusion that Neanderthals, that we have Neanderthal DNA, but it's not as clear cut as you would think. The way they presented their report is that you have non-Africans have more Neanderthal DNA than Africans. That's the way they presented their report. They lied. They lied because they omitted a very important point, or they put it really in a very fine print, which was never dealt with ever again, and that is that American Indians and Papua New Guineans have more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans. And you would say, well, how is that possible? I mean, if Neanderthals were in Europe and they mated with humans in Europe, with the Cro-Magnons, right? Why is it that these faraway places, American Indians, Papua New Guineans, have more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans? But they don't put it that way. The way they presented, or what they emphasize, is that non-Africans have more than Africans. So they lied by doing that, and they never dealt with that subject ever again. Okay, one fellow says, does money exist? You said that when money is no more, humans will become extinct. So you also say that existence equals location plus shape. Not true. What I say is something a little different, okay? And here it is. Say exists is object plus location, not location plus shape. Shape is an adjective, okay? And we're saying that it's got to be the word object. You can't change the words on that definition. That's the first thing I need to point out. And so does money and or trade exist? It was an invention of civilization. If money had a standard and was backed by gold and silver, then it would exist. What's your take on this? And here's the take on this, okay? Shape is an adjective, okay? And it is irrational to say that a concept exists, okay? So what we have is money is a static concept, okay? And you give value to this thing we call money, and it's in your mind. It's not out there. It's in your head, right? And trade is a dynamic concept. Trade means you're going to exchange something, okay? And so gold, the rock, that's an object. That's a thing, okay? Let me put this over here. That's a thing, okay? And give me a second here. And paper money is also a thing. So you can say that gold, the rock, right, the metal, right, that exists. But you can't say money exists, because money is a concept that you have in your brain. Okay, so you can't say that money exists. So you have to be careful to distinguish the object from the concept. Gold exists, the paper money, that exists. The paper exists with the ink on it, right? That you can say exists, but you can't say money exists or trade exists, because those are concepts. One is a static concept, the other one a dynamic concept. Okay, we had a visit from the aliens, and here they are, 2 aliens they found in Peru. They say that they only have 3 fingers, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I don't know what these 2 mummies are, okay? But I can tell you one thing for sure, 100% sure. They don't come from another planet. Okay, it's impossible for life to travel interstellarly. I'm on record with that. Okay, you can look up the Pioneer anomaly video that I made and get acquainted with the theory, but it's impossible to travel interstellarly. We have no chance of ever going to the nearest star. We can only look at it from, the telescope from afar. But we cannot travel interstellarly, and so no life, no living entity can travel interstellarly. That's the position we take here. There's a theory behind that. I'm not going to go over that right now. You can ask the question someday, okay? So all I'm saying is you can't travel interstellarly. Whatever those two mummies are, they don't come from outside the Earth. Whatever it is, it came from within the Earth. It could be a hoax. It could be for real. Who knows? Maybe they chopped 2 fingers off for all I know. I mean, I don't know. But they don't come from abroad, meaning, from another planet, from the land of the Klingons. And the final issue here is autism. Okay, and again, this has to do a little bit with the Calhoun experiment. Okay. Fellow says, diet is more powerful than most people think. And so the fellow goes out there saying, that autism might be caused by some environmental or dietary, those would be the causes. Okay, that's the source. And I think it's the same fellow. He continues, he says, maybe it's not, but I don't know. I don't remember now. Autism, I think it's a combination of dysgenics and vestigiality. And he goes on defining both of those. So if you turn off certain genes in a chicken embryo, you can get them to grow dinosaur-like faces. Why does he say that? Well, he says that because the theory right now is that dinosaurs, or that came from some kind of feathered animal in the past. They found one here in Germany, which I went to see, by the way. And that's that dinosaurs were more like chickens. And I have no problem with that, except that, we have to be careful with extrapolating, saying, oh, the dinosaurs are still alive because all these birds, they're dinosaurs. That's a long stretch. Okay? So the fact that dinosaurs could have had feathers does not mean that chickens are dinosaurs, okay, which is more or less what these people conclude. And they just state that like if it was a fact, instead of, pulling back and being a little bit skeptical about that theory, okay? Anyways, we define autism, and here we have it. Autism, the psychology of hunter-gatherers. This fellow defines it as such. And he continues saying that, this is a vestige from the old days, that we've got some of these genes inside of us, and they pop up in this day and age. Okay, so that the reason we have autism today is that it's just in our genes, and they just popped up again, okay, after many generations. And, he says the reason we know that the autism is vestigial is because the brains of allistic people are smaller and have fewer nerve connections, just like all domesticated animals. And it is the reason why the average person comes across as thoughtless livestock. Why does he say that? Because he says that he's autistic, but he's very intelligent. He's saying that he's intelligent. Okay? So he's trying to justify why he's an autist and so intelligent, and he says because the average person is not. To some degree, I would agree with him saying that, the average person is not very intelligent, or maybe they don't investigate things, which is maybe not different, a little different than saying intelligent, but but no, I'm saying that I don't think it has anything to do with vestigial anything. It's not autism. That it has very little to do with what happened in the past. I'm saying that we are becoming more autistic because of what Calhoun showed in the lab. In other words, that if you have inbreeding several generations, at some point you're going to have problems, mental problems, especially in a crowded environment. And that's what we have today. We have humans living in cities, which are very crowded, right? We have these enormous ant holes. We're not creating new cities. There's ample room. I mean, all of Russia, biggest country in the world, 1/8 of the surface of the earth, completely empty. And the Russians are now in population decline, especially after the war with Ukraine. And why is that? Well, because, people live in cities, and in cities you don't have kids. And nobody's moving out of the city to create new cities in the middle of nowhere. Why? Because, everybody does exactly the opposite. They go from the villages to the big cities to get jobs, primarily in the service industry. And so all this land is just going to, when we all die, when humans disappear from the face of the earth, we're going to find, if the Martians came here a million years later, they would find that all this land was not occupied. They had all this land, nobody lived in it, and all the people were crowded in these cities. Why? Why didn't they go out there and populate, all this vast land that was empty out there? Well, because the era of colonization is over. Okay, we don't colonize anymore. We don't spread out and colonize the land anymore. We're not going to be founding new cities. And so, this is how humans are going to end. And just as icing on the cake, I just want to clarify that autism, there's short-range over-connectivity and long-range under-connectivity. In other words, different sides of the brains are not connected in an autistic person. So it's not that they have more connections or fewer connections, it's that they have the wrong, quotations on that, connections. Parts of the brains are not connected as well as in a normal human being. So if you're autistic, it's not because you're so intelligent, it's because you don't have your brain connected. And so for tasks that require us to combine or assimilate information in different parts of the brain, like social function and complex motor tasks, individuals with autism have more trouble. Okay, that's more or less the conclusion of the doctors, of the researchers. You can take it, with a grain of salt if you want. And then just in case, here's the case for Down syndrome. Individuals with Down syndrome suffer from developmental delay, intellectual disability, and an early onset of neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's-like disease, or precocious dementia due to what? An extra chromosome 21. What does this mean? It means that, when you say, this person suffers from Down syndrome, people say, well, yeah, he was born that way. But when you say this person is autistic, a lot of people say, well, it's what he ate. It's the environment. It's all this poison that all the companies are putting in our foods and who knows what. It's the air we breathe, the pollution. So you don't say that for a Down syndrome because that's so self-evident. And the only thing there a person might say, who believes that it's all environmental and food, they would say, well, it's their parents who ate the wrong stuff and that's why the kid came out like that. Well, I'm not sure if eating is going to change your chromosomes, even for your children. I think something else is going on. And again, I stick by my words that this has to do with inbreeding after thousands of years. And now we're suffering the consequences of that. On the one hand, it was good because, our forefathers, our great grandfathers especially, they went through this sifting process where they encountered diseases. Diseases killed those that had no natural defenses. And those who went ahead, they had children, and those are forefathers. And that's why, if you look at today, a Japanese, a Russian, someone from Africa or South America or Europe, we're all clones of each other. And you say, well, why is that? Well, it's because our forefathers, whether in Japan, in Africa, in Europe, in South America, they went through the same sifting process. Those who made it across, they all had similar DNA. Chromosomes and so on. And those who died did not have the natural defenses to overcome some of these diseases. That's why we're all the same today. And it doesn't matter if you're Japanese or Indian or whatever, we're all clones because we went through the same sifting process thanks to our forefathers. And that's good as far as, your health, the fact that we don't die of diseases these days in this day and age, especially childhood diseases, the whooping cough and so on. We don't die of those things anymore. We die of old age today. But at the same time, we are all clones of each other, and now we're having genetic diseases or ailments or problems, right? Disorders. Why? Because we've been inbreeding for so long that now we don't have to worry about contagious diseases. We have to worry about genetic diseases. That's my take on that.